John moved the candle closer to the letter, and he rubbed his eyes, squinting as he struggled to see the print. His eyesight was not what it had once been. Back in his younger days, he could spot schools of fish hiding just beneath the water's surface. He could clearly see the shoreline and a safe harbor more than a mile away. He could pick out the rocks and the snags hidden under the waves and carefully navigate his boat to safety through the dangerous waters. John knew that his vision was a blessing. When he and the other disciples traveled with Jesus, they would often pass by those in the street who could not see. Some had lost their sight due to an illness or an injury. Others had been born blind. But it was a different kind of blindness that bothered John the most these days, a spiritual blindness. The candle flickering next to him reminded John of how Jesus had come to free those who were in this kind of spiritual darkness. Yes, Jesus had healed the sick and cured the people of physical blindness. John had personally witnessed his master performing many of these signs and wonders. But Jesus' even greater mission was to bring the light of God's kingdom to earth and push back the darkness the enemy had used to keep people from seeing the truth. In him was life, John later wrote, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus had charged him to spread that light to the world. Let your light shine before others, he had said to John and the other disciples, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. John lit another candle and watched it burn. The light of Christ was still with him, and he was still sharing that light with the world. It was a mission he would never abandon. John remembered the day that Jesus taught him and the disciples an important lesson about physical and spiritual blindness. It began on a road near the city of Jerusalem when Jesus saw a man who had been blind from birth. This man dwelt in a dark world. Other men his age had learned a craft, but he sat on the side of the road. Others had an income, but he begged for money. Others had reason to hope, but he only had reason to despair. But then Jesus saw him. It was Jesus who took the initiative. John and the other disciples were walking on the same road, but they didn't see the blind man. Yes, the man entered their field of vision, but they didn't really see him, at least not in the way that Jesus saw him. Rather, they just asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" At the time, rabbis taught that blindness and any other such ailment came about as a result of a person's sin. They saw it as a form of divine judgment, and they believed that this sin was transferable. So when a person was born blind, they assumed it was due to the parent's sin. For the disciples, the man represented an opportunity to talk philosophy with their rabbi, to clear up confusion on the issue. But Jesus didn't see the man as a theological case study. He saw him as a person who was trapped in a dark world, begging while people passed by him. We often wonder if Jesus sees us in our plight. Does he understand our pain? Will he guide us when we can't see the way forward? John's story reveals that the answer is yes. We are not invisible to God. We haven't been overlooked. We may feel like this beggar, but Jesus always sees us. And Jesus' answer to the disciples' question was that neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. You see, the cause of the man's condition could not be traced to sin. Don't search the family tree. Don't request a copy of the man's rap sheet. Blame this blindness on a call from God. Why was the man sightless? Well, so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Jesus' lesson to the disciples and to us is that we cannot blame suffering on the anger of God. If we follow the troubles to the headwaters, we won't find a wrathful or befuddled God standing there, but we will find a sovereign God. Our pain has a purpose. Our problems, our struggles, our heartaches and hassles cooperate toward one end, and that is the glory of God. Now that answer was not what the disciples were expecting, but Jesus' next action surprised them even more. As John watched, Jesus spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Now there is something you don't expect to read in the Bible. Jesus spitting. The God who sent manna and fire from heaven dispatched a blob of saliva into the dirt. And as calmly as a painter spackles a wall, Jesus streaked miracle mud on the man's eyes. Couldn't have been a pleasant experience for the man, but be forewarned, God still uses those less than pleasant remedies today to help us see. Sometimes he'll use layoffs and letdowns and failures or bouts of loneliness to get us from where we are to where he wants us to be. We often won't recognize what he's doing until we wash the mud spit from our eyes, and then suddenly we can see. We find our way out of the dark. Jesus' next instruction was to go wash in the pool of Siloam. Access to this pool that was located outside the walls of Jerusalem involved ascending 3 sets of stone-hewn steps, 5 steps each. This was no casual stroll. But the man followed Christ's instructions, and he groped his way to the water. And he leaned over the edge and he splashed his eyes. And as he did, he saw the water ripple and the sunlight sparkle on the surface. And with another splash, he could make out the forms of people who stood to either side. And from one moment to the next, he could see. You know, people often ask, what does a person need to know to become a follower of Christ? This story provides the answer. The man knew nothing of the virgin birth, the Beatitudes, the cost of discipleship, or the meaning of the Holy Spirit. He only knew that Jesus had put some mud on his eyes and told him to wash. He received sight not because he deserved it, earned it, or found it, but because he obeyed the one who was sent to open eyes that are blind. Nothing has changed today. Jesus still finds blind people and restores their sight. He promised that through his ministry, the blind shall see. He commissioned the Apostle Paul to go among the Gentiles, to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God. Christ came to give light and sight. Sadly, this story also reveals that there are some who will not receive this gift. There are those who will choose to remain blind to the work God is doing in their midst. In this case, it was the religious leaders in the man's own community who chose to remain blind. John recalled that when they first heard about the miracle, they became incredulous and combative. They quickly launched an investigation on how the man could see. The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes, the man replied. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see. This was not the answer the religious leaders wanted. They refused to recognize or celebrate that a miracle had taken place. The reason why? Well, apparently, Jesus had failed to consult the official healing handbook. As John would later write, now it was a Sabbath on the day that Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. The Pharisees were saying the man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. That noise you hear is the beeping of the absurdity Geiger counter. The religious leader's verdict bounces the needle. Here is a parallel response. Suppose the swimming pool where you like to go has a sign on the fence that reads, "Rescues performed by certified lifeguards only." Well, you never think good or bad about the rule until the day you decide to dive into the pool from the shallow end and you bang your head on the bottom, you black out 10 feet under. Next thing you know, you're belly down on the side of the pool coughing up water. Someone rescued you. And when the lifeguards appear, the fellow who pulled you out of the deep disappears. As you come to your senses, you tell the story. But rather than rejoice, the people recoil. "Doesn't count, doesn't count." They shout like referees waving off a basketball that cleared the net after the clock had expired. It wasn't official, wasn't legal. Since the rescuer wasn't certified, consider yourself drowned. Ridiculous? You bet. Will no one rejoice with this man? Surely at least the man's parents will be glad that their son can now see. Surely they will stand up for him and rejoice in what Jesus has done. But their reaction is even worse. John would still shake his head whenever he related their response. "We know he is our son. We know he was born blind. But how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself." Not even the man's parents would stand up for him. A bona fide miracle had occurred in their midst. But no one in the community could see anything but themselves and their religion. They refused to acknowledge the truth of what had happened, that the sent one of God had made the man see. So ultimately, they kicked the man out of the temple. They expelled him from the community. They told him, in effect, that from now on, he'd be out on his own, alone. The fellow had to be bewildered. Born blind only to be healed, healed only to be kicked out only to be left alone, all alone. But as we have seen, when we have Jesus in our lives, we're never truly alone. Christ wasn't about to leave the man unprotected. And when he heard what had happened, he went out in search of the man and found him. You can expect the same. If you believe in Jesus, he has given this pledge to you. No one can steal you out of my hand. Others may disown you. Your family may reject you. The religious establishment may dismiss you. There may be times that you feel you're all alone and stumbling in darkness. Apart from Christ, we are all like the blind man beside the road. But Jesus finds us, applies his miracle mud to our eyes, and guides us out of the darkness. John set down the letter and again looked at the candles. He knew that Jesus, the light of the world, had guided him out of his own spiritual darkness. He had accepted that gift where others had refused it. He would later ponder this fact when he wrote, "Jesus came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." A child of God. This is the offer that Jesus still extends to you today. It is not God's will that you grope blindly through life, abandoned and alone. God sees you in your darkness. He calls you and restores your sight. And when you experience rejection from others, he is there to defend you. He promises that as his child, you will never be alone.